What if the good girl you were taught to be might be the exact reason you feel disconnected from your body, your desire, and your feminine power? In this episode of Sea of Radiance, I continue my exploration into the hidden forces shaping feminine expression. I uncover the deeper, often unconscious patterns that keep women disconnected from their bodies, their sensuality, and their full aliveness. Building on the concepts of the mother and sister wounds, I expose additional layers, including good girl conditioning, people pleasing patterns, outsourced permission, and the fragmentation of the self that occurs in childhood. I also break down how shame, familial expectations, and cultural norms subtly train women to suppress their desires, mute their voices, and disconnect from their erotic life force, and a whole lot more. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Sea of Radiance. I'm your hostess, Erin Pettis. In the last episode, I spoke about the issue of inherited messaging around what others consider appropriate or acceptable feminine expression, especially the messaging we receive from an older generation of women in our families and the mother wound that can result from the judgments and constructs we internalize. I also discussed envy, comparison, and competition between sisters and women of the same or similar generations that can lead to sister wounds. All of these influences can be acting as subconscious blocks behind our limited expression and the feeling of being regulated in our physical, emotional, and sensual expression as women. Today, I will outline a few more key players, a few more points of origin that may be keeping your full embodiment and enjoyment of your femininity under wraps and confined. These will help you have a more complete picture of how and why we don't all feel confident in expressing ourselves fully as women in American culture, why we don't all feel connected to our bodies, and why we are restricted in our sensuality. I am very interested in how we have come to be this way. I'm intrigued by how we arrive at our sense of okayness and how we keep ourselves bound and even victimized and shut down in our embodiment and self expression. I'm curious why we might consciously or unconsciously decide that we can't experience wholeness or full embodiment and a vibrant self expression as women. What else plays into our being constricted and contracted? So, first of all, we have all inherited messaging I mentioned before. I included some reflection prompts for you in the show notes of the previous episode that you can revisit and explore to get a sense of your personal inherited familial and cultural dogma around feminine expression. And today I'll continue that discussion by asking who in your family or friend group would be uncomfortable in the presence of your more bold self expression? Are you appeasing them as an excuse or a vice, or do you feel fearful or unsupported in being more enlivened, more energetically vibrant? To take up more space, in a sense, to be more joyful, to be free of the limits by which those in your female circle or community are confined. Secondly, I'm curious if you've had the experience that I had of being told to be sweet, to be quiet. Essentially, the directive that you had to be a well mannered good girl. Was people pleasing encouraged of you, even subtly? Consider who and in which ways your environment growing up reinforced your smallness. As a foundational practice in feminine embodiment, we look to the past to review the context from which we came in order to trace the influences there and to bring all of that into consciousness so that the subconscious loosens its grip on our behavioral patterns and what was formerly controlling us through shame, primarily, is brought into an arena where we can choose to play the roles of our lives. We can choose to play them differently. We can even redefine our roles. Along the same lines as the good girl model of femininity as the only acceptable role, I would ask you to investigate whether you have outsourced your permission to inhabit your body and to feel enlivened in your eros and your sensuality. Are you centered in yourself? This is a question that a mentor of mine asked me some years ago, and it stopped me in my tracks. She asked me to center in myself. For my entire life previous to that moment, I had internalized an unspoken directive that I was to dedicate my life to other people. For me, that meant overgiving in every conceivable way, having pitifully porous boundaries, and not considering what my personal desires were. I was almost entirely externally focused. So when I began to turn my attention towards what my personal values and pleasure would look and feel like, I began a true relationship with myself. I want to clarify that centering in yourself is not the same as being selfish. It is self resourcing so that you don't seek external validation or a definition of who you are or what your value or worth are from anyone outside of you. And then expanding on that, I would also ask you to consider whether you were waiting for someone else to grant you permission to develop an erotic relationship with yourself. I personally hadn't really considered my own erotic experience as something that is mine alone. I would have said some years ago that because I'm married, my erotic life is a shared experience as part of a couple. I was formerly quite disconnected from relating to my own desires and pleasures on my own. But I realize now that my personal exploration is up to me and that finding my own sources of turn on and enjoyment enhanced my relationship with my husband immensely. The two of us have basically grown up together as we've been together since we were in college. And this realization that not all of my erotic or sensual life is tied into my partnership has been revelatory for me. If you feel like your turn on or source of erotic life force energy has flatlined within your partnership, you might start exploring your own body and sources of turn on to find out what your personal desires are on your own. Because in reality, there's your Eros, your partner's Eros, and a third state created between you. So each of you serve your unified field of intimacy when you're each in relationship with your own bodies, what turns you on, and your own individual sensual energy. Being in a state of turn on is something we each have the responsibility and the great privilege of experiencing, whether we are partnered or not. I also want to elaborate on this sense that I raised earlier of the fragmented self or the shadow aspects of ourselves that we abandoned or suppressed along the course of our childhoods. I've mentioned this in previous episodes. That is the subconscious role played by our shadow behind the scenes. What happens during childhood is we internalize behaviors such as the people pleasing or the contortion of ourselves into configurations and personas that others deem acceptable so that we'll be taken care of and hopefully loved by our parents in particular. And we unconsciously put the acceptable parts of ourselves away, almost like in a basement, because we learned that to express those aspects of ourselves would be dangerous or threatening to our survival or our well being somehow. But those aspects don't die. They simply either run the show surreptitiously in blips of uncharacteristic behavior, or at some point in our lives, they may start metaphorically flipping tables and breaking things in order to be recognized and integrated. If we've limited the full expression of our soul and ignored our soul's calling, at some point there will be a time of reckoning. And for many women, this occurs as part of a newfound connection to sensuality and self expression of Eros. In my practice as a mentor of feminine embodiment and sensuality, I implement guided imagery journeys to connect to these aspects within and to reintegrate them so that, sort of like a tantruming child, they are listened to and tended to and then brought back and integrated. I have seen such remarkable healing of old wounds from childhood following this deep exploration and integration work. And I really can't overemphasize the influences at play beneath the surface of conscious awareness, sort of behind the scenes. I also help clients find the treasures held by suppressed or fragmented parts of themselves. I found that in addition to requests or directives that need to be heard, there are always treasures located in the subconscious, just waiting for us to reach for them. As you delve deeper into your own relationship with your sensual expression and to your own Eros, you may find it helpful to begin to clear these blocks and to evaluate the influences that inform your relationship with your body and your life force energy as a woman. I really hope that this episode was helpful for you, and if so, please like and share this episode with other women in your life. Thank you, and see you next time.